السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So, continuing in the Women's History Month, I guess a couple of days ago was Women's History Day. And in the Muslim community, it's important for us to address our problems according to our own legacy of faith. What we have right now is a widespread ignorance of Islam amongst Muslims. And that has led to various levels of extreme, either rigidity in some cultural form, believing it to be religiosity, or the new extreme, which is rebellious, following the West in everything they expect from us, the new reformed Islam according to what the West believes is the best way for Islam to be followed and expressed. So, if we indeed embrace our history and the legacy of the reality of women as found in the Quran and the Sunnah, the way that Allah is arranging the affairs of the believers and emphasizing natural inherent qualities and potential exceptions to the rule and norm in different ways for male and female, then we'll see where the solution is. Women would not need to go run and take off their modest clothing and to start to challenge things in Islam that are well set if there wasn't such an extreme unfairness or mistreatment towards them from religious Muslim men in the Muslim societies. You get what I'm saying? When one extreme breeds another extreme. When one extreme comes, the other one fights back and forms another extreme. KKK, the Nation of Islam. Right? That's how it works. Hating on these people, they go fight for their rights and change the nature of the laws of nature. So, let's look at some of the examples that we have in our history. Starting with, how many of you have heard of Imam al-Dhahabi? Oh, it's very important to know who Imam al-Dhahabi is. Imam al-Dhahabi wrote many books. He was a historian and a hadith scholar. He wrote the famous book called Al-Kaba'ir, in which he defined 80-some major sins and discussed them and defined them with all the scriptural references. That's the main book used to define those things. But his famous work is Sir A'lam al-Nubala. It's like 23 volumes. It's a lot of biographical research on all of the great scholars and people of our history. In that collection is hundreds of women that are great scholars and leaders in the Islamic history. Imam al-Dhahabi says, starting with the Tabi'een, there is a large amount of men who they say, from the Tabi'een, those who followed the companions of the Prophet, that they took lots of knowledge from women from the Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. So that's where it all started. This idea of women teaching men has become a taboo. And that is absolutely in conflict with the Quran. Why? First of all, the Quran says, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَلَى الْمُنكَرِ. Right? That the believing men, this is Surah At-Tawbah, that the believing men and the believing women, they are guardian supporters of each other. Collectively, they are promoting what's right. Collectively, they are prohibiting what's wrong. They are praying together. They are giving charity. They are obeying Allah and His Messenger together. Another verse says, والسابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان رضي الله عنهم ورضوا. The generation of companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, those from Mecca who migrated, and those from Medina, the Ansar, who welcomed them in. Those and whoever follows them to the best of their ability, God is pleased with them as they are pleased with God. We see right here that it was the sunnah of the tabi'een for men to learn from women and have women as their teachers. Imam Ibn Asakir was one of our great historians. He wrote books in fiqh, he wrote books in aqidah, but his most famous work, which is seen as an amazing scientific anthropological work, is called Tarikh Dimashq. It is a multi-volume book on the history of Damascus. Ibn Asakir, Imam Dhahabi says, in writing that book, he has 80 teachers who were women. He said, من شيوخه 80 من النساء. From his teachers and scholars that taught him are 80. If you're going to write a big comprehensive book on history, and you're having an Islamic vibe and Islamic history and all of that, you should have many teachers. He had hundreds of teachers, but 80 of them were women. How many of you have heard of Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib? Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, he was seen amongst the tabi'een as the greatest scholar among the people of Medina. He taught Imam al-Zuhri, and Imam al-Zuhri taught Imam Malik. So that's the chain. Sa'id ibn Musayyib, who did he learn from? He learned from Aisha. He learned from Abdullah bin Umar. He learned from Abdullah bin Abbas. He learned from many Abadillah. We call them Abadillah, all those Abdullahs. So his daughter got married to the granddaughter of Abu Hurairah. Of course, makes perfect sense. Pious people marry among themselves. So the grandson of Abu Hurairah, he was the student of Sa'id ibn Musayyib. He was studying in his circle, and then he told his sheikh, I'm looking to get married and I'm looking for a pious woman. Sa'id says, well, my daughter, she is, mashallah, this and that. So they got married. And after everything got settled, this honeymoon or whatever, 3 days they have, the Islamic, it's a sunnah. 3 days you spend a lot of time away from everything together and kind of build a connection. And so he told her, he said, my respected, beloved wife, I'm going to go to the mosque to your father's lecture. She said to him, as is narrated in the Athar, that إذا أردت علم سعيد بن مسيب فاجلس أريك إياه. If you would like to know the knowledge of my father, sit down, I will teach you. What did he do? He sat down and learned from his wife. He learned the religion from his wife. Now, if you said that to many common folk, say for example, in some poor Muslim country that's struggling with literacy and things like that, they'll say, this is nonsense. This is absolutely false. But this is well-established history, written by our great historians. Ibn Hazm, how many of you heard of Ibn Hazm? Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, al-Andalusi, was seen as one of the greatest scholars in the history of Andalus, Muslim Spain. Ibn Hazm wrote a book called Al-Muhalla. Again, it's 20-some volumes. It's his book on Islamic law. He had a different madhab than Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, and Ahmad. And in Saudi Arabia, they teach his school of thought as the fifth madhab. Sheikh Nasruddin Albani basically revived this method in his hadith. And Ahl al-Hadith from India, they have revived this method, kind of strictly taking the literal hadith and just focusing on what we know from the texts and not getting too far into the analogous. Ibn Hazm wasn't just a faqih, he was a poet, he was a philosopher, he was a scientist. Ibn Hazm, he said that he learned from many women, and that in his life, his knowledge was greatly enriched by studying with many women. So there is a woman named Sittita bint al-Mahamil. She's a 10th century scholar of jurisprudence. Ibn Hazm said she was a scholar of fatwa and she became a judge. And people tried to challenge her, but they were defeated in the arena of Islamic law every time they challenged her based upon her being a woman, because there is an opinion that women should not be judges. So when they challenged Sittita, she would defeat them with knowledge. She became known as the Shafi'i school of thought representative and reference in Homs. Homs is the great oldest city in Syria. So that's another example. Sheikha Zainab bint Ahmad ibn al-Kamal al-Maqdisi. She was named Bint al-Kamal. Imam Ibn Asakir explains that she is Shaykhatun Salihatun Mutawadi'atun Mu'ammaratun صاحبة الأسانيد العالية التي تفردت بها مسندة الشام. Ibn Asakir, the great scholar and historian, he said that Zainab bint Ahmad bint al-Kamal al-Maqdisi, she was a great sheikh, a pious woman of great humility. She was a builder of civilization. She was someone who knew great scholars that were great elders before her, to where she had chains of narration that were very short between her and the Prophet ﷺ, and she had chains of narration in the fiqh and the usul and the hadith. She had many categories in her chains of narration. People used to come from all over to study with her. She was a Hanbali fiqh scholar, and she was from Damascus. She was also known to be a hadith scholar that narrated hadith and held chains in the hadith. She was also a very pious woman who spent a lot of time praying in the night, fasting during the day, and very careful in her religion. She would give fatwas based upon the people's circumstances, and people would ask her, "But I see you seem to be more strict." She said, "For myself, spiritually, I'm taking that opinion, but I'm giving you the fatwa that I think is suitable for you." And so this was her level of knowledge. Her family started her whenever she was 5 years old, sitting with scholars, learning the Quran and the Hadith. She memorized the Quran 9 years old. She had all the Hadith collections by a teenager. Great scholar, woman. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, have you ever heard of him? Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Ibn Hajar was called Imam al-Muhaddithin, the great scholar who was the great reference and leader of the scholars of Hadith. He has 12 women that he took ijazah in Hadith from. In his own collection that he's narrating, he mentions 12 women of the probably 100 ijazahs he has in all the Hadith sciences and collections that are women that he learned from them and took his knowledge. So that brings us to Fatima al-Fihriya. Have you ever heard of her?
Morocco.
Yeah, from Morocco. Anybody else heard of her? She has an amazing story. And I just want to go through this amazing research I found on her. She was raised in Morocco under Idris II in the Caliphate back in the 11th century Common Era. And she was from a village called Qayrouan in present-day Tunisia, and then she moved to Fez in modern-day Morocco. So during the time of Idris II, there was this intellectual renaissance happening in Spain and North Africa. And the Muslim scholarship was developing the sciences by way of collective ijaza, which will lead to a degree of mastery which would make one officially a teacher. And it would be recognized by all. Whereas before, there would be individual, very specific on one book, by one sheikh, and then, unless people knew your sheikh, or sheikha, as we're making clear, then they might not want to learn from you, right? So it would be very restricted, historically, to the locality and who knew the scholars of that place. So this concept of university-style learning was developing. So Fatima, her father Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Fihri, he was a very, very successful power businessman in all of North Africa. And he made a lot of wealth. His sons made a lot of wealth. And unfortunately, Fatima and her sister Miriam were the only daughters. And so they were focused on religion and spiritual growth, whereas the sons and the dad were out getting wealth and establishing the business empire. Within 2 years, their brothers have all died. And they inherited all this money. So Fatima, her sister Miriam, she said, I'm going to build a mosque called Masjid al-Andalus. And I want to bring some great architects from Spain and make something here to bring this beautiful place here. Fatima said, I want to build a mosque, but I would like to institutionalize the Islamic sciences in this mosque. And I want it to be multifaceted and have many rooms and places to learn. And so it would not be conflicting with prayers. And then she had this great grand design. So she got together all of the great architects and builders, and she paid them all to leave whatever they were doing with all this wealth she has. She said, I want to build this mosque, Qaraween. So she started fasting, and she nadarat an tasum yawmiyan hatta tanqadi hadha al-amr. So until this whole place is built, she's going to fast. And she's going to pray that Allah will make it, conclude it in a very beautiful fashion. So she fasted for 2 years straight. Yeah. And everybody's building. And every day she's watching and she's managing the whole thing. This one, I think lots of money, a fortune is put into this. And so she founded the Qarawiyyin Mosque and University. Western historians have all pretty much agreed, that are privy to this part of history, that this was the first institutionalization of what we understand to be the modern day university model in world history. This pious Muslim woman was the first person in world history to institutionalize a university. So as they finished the first multifaceted phase, she had extra money, and so she gave so much wealth to people who own property in the neighboring areas. Because she envisioned things like dorms. What if students come here and they live here, right next to the place, they can live here. And by the way, all of this was replicated in Azhar in Cairo, in Egypt. This whole system was established. So, people who came through there they established Islamic sciences, but they also established general sciences and philosophy. There's a guy named, I've never heard of this guy, but he's supposed to be some big guy. His name's Leo Africanus, famous author and traveler. He studied the famous Maliki jurist Ibn al-Arabi, Abu Bakr Ibn al-Arabi, Ibn Khaldun, famous historian, studied there. The great astronomer Al-Batruji is from there as well. Non-Muslims would come there and they would study and they would be in awe of this new system and this very well structured style. So by the 14th century, the university, the Qarawiyyin library with Timbuktu, these two libraries probably had more manuscripts, original scholarly manuscripts, than all of the manuscripts of Europe in these two libraries. They have thrown down numbers in the millions. This is the numbers the historians said of original scholarly work, curricula that was developed in these places. So this legacy is something that we as a Muslim community can not only not afford to not know, but to not communicate to everyone that we know. I want to conclude with an amazing story that I just read through over the last couple of days of the history, the first part of the history of women governors or leaders of the caliphate. I did not know that existed, and I came to know that that existed. So the first one, her name is Arwa bint Ahmed al-Salihiyya. She was, she came to authority in the Malik al-Makram time. When he died, he had no sons. And she was a very pious woman, and this was in Yemen. And she became the ruler of Yemen, and she was called Al-Hurra, Al-Malika, Al-Sayyida, Al-Sadida, and she ruled Yemen for 55 years. 55 years. It's an amazing part of our history. But the story of Radiyatul Deen is an amazing story. She is from India in the Mamalik time of the... So what happened was in Islamic history, some people who were originally slaves became very strong workers in the government, and at some point their group took authority in Egypt and in North Africa and even in Syria and India and elsewhere. So her dad was Iltamish. In the time, it was in the year 1236 Common Era. In India, he had 4 sons and 1 daughter. So she was born in the middle of them, and he was so excited to have a daughter. He had 2 sons, now he has a daughter, and so he had some parties and some things, and the land was excited to hear about this. And he had this idea that his sons need to learn the government and all of this. So while his daughter was young, he made sure that she learned the sciences and spirituality and scripture and fiqh and aqidah. He also made sure that she learned the riding of horses, horsemanship. And she became a master at arrows as well as swords mentioned. So by the time she was a teenager, he said, my daughter is better than all of my sons combined one time. And they all got mad at him. What is this? So when he died, his son took authority. His name was Ruknuddin Fairuz. And Ruknuddin unfortunately got caught up in alcohol and parties and women and wearing silk and all these things, because unfortunately he did not really get established in the religion too much. And so while his dad, Iltamish, was a religious man, he was out in the government factions, and government and corruption have always been partners. And so he basically started to oppress people. He started to pick certain people who kept certain amounts of wealth. And the society became upset. And so then his brother killed him and said, I'm the rightful leader. So at this time, Radiyatuddin, she is now a woman in her own right, in her late 20s and early 30s. And she knows that she's talked with the Muslim scholars. She said, as far as I know, no matter if you're the ruler or the ruled, if you kill someone, then you are a criminal. So why is everybody giving their allegiance to this guy, my brother here? Because he's just as corrupt as the other one. And he's claiming that he's going to fix the problems, and we all know that he's not going to, because he doesn't even follow the religion. The scholars took her side. It's an amazing story. So she started this movement, and then the new ruler called for her death. Said, my sister Radiya should be killed by rule of law of the state, of the rulership of the governorate of India. So she hid. And as she hid and found a way, she said, you know what? I'm going to go up over the mount by where the big Jami' is. Because there's this mountain area over there, mountainous hill thing, right by where the big mosque is, where he's supposed to go, for Khutbah Jummah. And so she goes there, she waits till everybody's gathering, and then she calls out to the people, here's what has happened. My brother has killed his brother. And he has now killed another brother who challenged him. And now he's saying I should be killed. I have done no crime. And you can ask all of the scholars and the police. I have never done any crime. All I'm saying is, according to Islam, the book of Allah says, the one who murders somebody should be murdered. All the people of the mosque grabbed him. And he was killed by qisas. And she has a very young brother who's a little boy. So they said, why don't we have her be our leader? So she became the leader of the nation. And she first started with the economy and the reality of shameful immorality, fixing it. And so she emphasized that alcohol is a sin, and we're going to emphasize the prohibition of this. Fornication and adultery are evil and sinful. We're going to emphasize that this is a crime. The economic system needs to be just and fair. We're going to take some of the wealth of some of these very wealthy people who are in the pocket of my brother. And she started to fix everything. And she emphasized knowledge and learning in the religion. And she basically reestablished order according to her father's system. And she was ruling for 4 years, like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz in India. They said she was well known, rajahatul aql. She's a very rational, well thought out person. Ghayatul dhaka, very clever and smart. Shaja'ah, she was a very courageous woman, did not fear what might happen, and she was always very clear to the point how she dealt with things. She was a pious woman who prayed a lot and fasted a lot. She was an Islamic jurist. She understood the Islamic law, and she was a reference in Islamic law. The Indian historians, they called her Balqis al-Hind. You know, Balqis, the famous queen of Sheba, mentioned in the Quran. Laha mulkun azim, what Allah said about her, a great thing. So in the 4 years that she ruled, this land of India started to bring goodness, and the conflict immediately started that the Abbasid Caliphate brought to question what's going on there, and who are they, and where's their allegiance. She felt it in the best interest of the Ummah to give allegiance to the Abbasid, because the Mamalik have lost authority anywhere near. So she said, I have allegiance to the Abbasid Caliph. I think it was Al-Mu'taman, Al-Muntasir Billah. So in India, where she was, they had the gold and the bronze coins that had her picture on it on one side, and the other side was the Khalifa al-Abbasi. So they had this there, and on the big ones it said Umdatun Nisa Malikatu Zaman Sultana Radiyatuddin bin Shamsuddin al-Tamash, that she is the great pillar of women, the queen of her time of India, Radiyatuddin. On the smaller wealth it said Sultanatul Mu'azzama Radiyatuddin, the great exalted ruler, Radiyatuddin. So after these 4 years, what started to happen is the group of wuzara, those who are responsible, the ministers who are mustashar, they are giving comments to her leadership. A group of scholars arose, Muslim scholars. And they said, okay, mashallah, it's been 4 years now, everything's settled, we need to get rid of this woman leader. Because in Islam, we should not have a woman leader. And so they started to get, the people. The problem was the armies had given her allegiance. And the concept of military, and those were some big armies, because they were dealing with Mongol, and they were dealing with all kind of stuff over there, And the Hind, the people of India, still half of India is over there, holding its ground and creating problems and turmoil. So slowly but surely they started this movement, and there was a man named Saifuddin Aibak, and he went through the army. He was a man of the army, and so he got influenced. He was a very respected man in the army, and so he got influenced by this Muslim scholars that are saying we should not have women ruling us. And so he convinced them that they should remove her from authority. So she tried to do whatever she could through diplomatic interactions, and then she went to hide for some time to think out a strategy And she ended up staying in a farm, but she was dressed up like a man. She had dressed herself up like a man in clothing in close to the winter time, and she went into the farm. And unfortunately, some guy who's a farmer, he comes to talk to her, and he found it weird that the guy does not want to come talk to him direct, and he wants to act like he's busy or sleeping or something in the farm. So he goes over there and finds out that it is a woman, and this guy's desires overcame him, and he raped her and killed her. Can you imagine that? SubhanAllah. So that was the end of her leadership and rule. You know, I once watched an interview of Barbara, I don't know, not Barbara Walters, but the other one. Who's the other famous blonde-haired? Oh, there's another one, younger. Diane Sawyer. Diane Sawyer went to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia once. And she's interviewing a princess from the Saudi family. And she's talking to her, and they're having a discussion, and and then she challenges this princess. She says, well, it's from a Western point of view, it seems as though women's rights and this and that here is a big problem. And the way women are treated and looked at. And we all know that Diane Sawyer has a point. But the way the princess turned the tables on her and created this very awkward situation was beautiful. She said, I'm sorry, Diane, but the last I checked, I know of 8 Muslim nations and many examples in history where the head of state of the Muslims was a woman. Can you please remind me when the last time the United States of America had a female head of state? Boy, you could see Diane Sawyer, she's trying to, it's like, what do I do? So she switched it around and changed the subject. She didn't even answer the question. She said, no, but how many senators and congressmen, like percentage-wise? Right? Her response was, well, as far as I know, women can't even vote here. She said, let's not talk about right here and today and now. Let's talk about Muslims as a whole. Very smart, very wise to embrace the ummah and all that. Now women are voting, and women are part of the Majlis al-Shab in Saudi Arabia. They are now women PM, or what do you call them, MPs or whatever, representatives in the government over there. So this is today's story. Is there any questions on this one? And subhanAllah, there are so many other stories. So many. Literally, each year for the next 5 years in March, Women's History Month, we're going to have plenty of things to talk about without even redoing. You know what I'm saying? And that's what's crazy. It's like the average Muslim would say that I've never heard of this. And if you've never heard of that, you have to know, was that accidental or intentional?
Intentional.
It's intentional. Because somebody knows this. Some men were knowing about all this stuff. And some men still do know about all this stuff. And we're taught in the Quran that hiding knowledge, significant knowledge, is sinful behavior. And the Israelites were charged with very serious charges because they would hide things and switch things according to their whims and their desires. Exactly as I say to Muslims about the attitude of fearing themselves or their children interacting with non-Muslims with this attitude of, oh no. Like the attitude is kind of like, I'm scared they're going to convert me. Like I will lose my religion if I'm around these people. Stop being scared. Know your religion, know its foundations, be steadfast, and be comfortable in yourself. And believe that what's going to happen is they will convert to your religion
Exactly.
if the discussion of religion comes up. It's the same thing. If a woman can lead, it's not normal. We know from the way God created men and women that it's not normal for a woman to become a great scholar or leader. That's an exception to the rule. But within our history and within our scholarship, we have vast mainstream literature that says that's fine if she's the best to do it, the most qualified and the one who's doing it well. We should not say because she's a woman. We should say generally we know, mostly God has created women for the huge responsibility and amazing leadership of being a mother. There's no question about that. Nobody's denying that. But if women can lead and they're doing good and they, produce results in scholarship, as we saw with Satita, that they tried to challenge her and she said, okay, what do you know about this mas'ala and that mas'ala? She's bringing all the fiqh stuff and they don't know how to deal with it. And she can answer them and go long lectures and details and all these things about Imam Shafi, and these guys don't know anything. So she's the one that should be making the courts and doing the law and the final. So, Wallah alam. Any questions?
What did you say, Fatima's last name was?
Al-Fahri. Al-Fahriya. If you look it up in English, you'll get lots of stuff. A-L-F-I-H-R-I. You'll get it. Unfortunately, most of these others, it's only in Arabic. If you look in English, you won't get any of this. And that's why they're saying what they're saying. They don't know about our history. We don't know about our history. How could they know? And see, we don't realize that this is creating the opposite response. You see? That if women knew the great history they had, that they can be a scholar, they can be a leader. They are someone of, equal footing when it comes to the eyes of God. What kind of a person she is and the value. Now obviously, she's not going to win an arm wrestling match. And men have a hard time understanding people's feelings. It takes us a lot of effort. And many men can never understand feelings. And it takes some women a lot of effort to be able to beat a man in an arm wrestling match. Or any other wrestling match. But they do it. Some of them are doing it now. So, wallah. جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك